Dr. Anthony, we'll get straight to it. We know that tomorrow 2 critical meetings are being held. In terms of those meetings, how important are those and what comes out of them in terms of shaping your policy prescriptions, which you will present next week?
The 2 meetings tomorrow are about different issues. At 10 o'clock in the morning, we meet the press. The intention is basically to brief the press, to provide the press with information that we have provided to unions and we are in the process of providing to the general public, so that the press would be aware of what the issues are. It is not an attempt to persuade the press to have a particular point of view or to advocate a particular point of view. Really, it is simply to provide information. It's not an interview session, meaning that the press is interviewing me or officials of the Ministry of Finance. Rather, it's an opportunity for the press to have access to the very same information that is being provided to the unions and to the public at large, and of course to answer any questions that they may have. The reality of this is not to distill from the press any specific position or to get them to prescribe any particular range of policies. Rather, it is an information session. It is really an effort to arm them with information so that when they're doing their interviews, when they're listening to speeches, when they are asking questions, they will have the information that is critical and crucial to posing their questions. It's not a situation that we are inviting the press to take any position to say yea or nay to any proposals emanating from the government. So that's the first meeting. The second meeting is a meeting with the trade unions, and we're going to continue the discussions we started last week. Essentially, on the last occasion that we met, we provided the information to them, the information that is available to the government, the information that the government will use as a basis to shape policy, to inform policy. Tomorrow we're going to take the discussions one step further and get a sense of what is the thinking of the unions. We had invited the unions to indicate to us proposals they might want to pursue. We made it quite clear that essentially we need to reduce expenditure by about $75 million. And we invited them to indicate if there were any proposals which they thought the government should pursue. So it's an opportunity to hear from them where exactly their minds are in terms of proposals emanating from them. It's going to be a long process. There have been several discussions, I'm afraid. But of course, I have also made it very clear to the unions that you can't continue discussions in perpetuity. Discussions have to come to an end. And so I think we have broadly agreed that we'll spend the next month talking to each other to see if we can find common ground, see if we can find consensus. So we are a long way off, but it's a very, very important start.
Okay, how important is it that all unions be present at tomorrow's meeting, in the sense that we know what happened with the CSA the last time? They're one of the largest unions on the island. How important is it that?
I wish all unions would attend. I do hope the CSA would rethink its position. I don't think that the keeping away is a good thing for their members. And let it not be said that the government is not keeping its doors open. Just like when we went through that testy period of negotiations and we kept our doors open, so our doors will always be open to the Civil Service Association. They are our primary employees, primary workers. And certainly, they too may have ideas as to how we deal with the situation, so it'll be good to hear from them. So the doors are wide open. The meeting is for all unions. And I simply hope that the president of the CSA reconsiders her postures and her views. I am not going to respond to the allegations made against the government. I don't think that helps the situation. Right now, we have to find a solution to the problems that confront us. And I think we have to work together to find solutions on those issues. So I'm very anxious to hear them. And I want to repeat what I said, that our doors are wide open. We have not shut any door on anyone.
Okay, you mentioned solutions, and that's going forward. That's the key here. That's what's important. And I know that there is talk of the 5% wage cut across the board. But even that being said, even if this were a possibility, we've heard from Dr. Darius himself that it's not enough, and that you have to look at a variety of measures to be able to reduce on the fiscal deficit. And you have mentioned no new taxes. You have said that. You're on record as saying that. And in terms of what already exists, such as the VAT, and looking at VAT on utilities, is that an option? Is that on the table?
Right. You're absolutely correct that I have indicated that I do not intend to introduce new taxes, for example, by introducing new legislation to tax items that are not currently taxed. What will simply happen is that we have to make adjustments within the existing tax framework. And I have indicated, for example, that we'll have to look at the range of items that are exempt and zero rated. The private sector have made it repeatedly clear that they need to have this list revisited because they are suffering because essentially they cannot claim input VATs on some of the exempt items. That's a crux of their problem. So we have to revisit that. Dr. Darius is absolutely correct that even if wages were to be reduced by the number that is being cited, it couldn't possibly resolve the problem because we have a problem where we need to close that deficit by reducing expenditure by about 75 million. Now, when I say close the deficit, I don't think we can cure the deficit at all. What we can do is simply to reduce it to manageable levels. So clearly, we would need either to and continue to cut expenditure to be able to get there, or hopefully that we can raise additional revenue that will deal with the situation. There are a lot of people who argue that the problem could be resolved by introducing VAT on the consumption of electricity and water. And let's face it, there are countries in the region where citizens pay VAT on water and electricity. I mean, St. Vincent's a classic case. I think they pay VAT on electricity. But there are some realities that we have to contend with. If the government had to introduce VAT, and it's a big if because the government does not have the intention of announcing any such thing in the budget, but I'm saying that if the government had to introduce VAT, we would raise about $31.5 million annually, easily, on electricity alone. If you were to add VAT on water, then it would be much higher. Now, clearly, if you can collect $36 million in 1 year, then you'd go a long way to resolving your problem. However, there are some fundamental issues that we need to take on board. First of all, the St. Lucia Labour Party made it clear in its contract, or in its blueprint for growth rather, that while there will be a time to introduce VAT on electricity, it did not think that VAT should be introduced on electricity until there was a proper regulatory mechanism to manage the prices at which electricity is made available to consumers, both domestic consumers and, of course, commercial consumers. So we said so. We indicated that to the electorate in very clear terms, that would be the position that we would take. It isn't that we didn't expect that sometime in the future we may have to take that route, but we said there must be a regulatory mechanism in place before you take that route. The second thing is this. We have to be realistic about the impact of VAT on consumers. If VAT was introduced on consumers, the people who would have to bear the most pain would be the ordinary consumers. I mean, a 15% on electricity bills for poor people would be very impactful, would be very, very, very significant. And I think in this process, we have to try and protect our poor and our vulnerable as much as possible. On the other hand, if you impose VAT on the commercial sector, and they're consuming a substantial amount of electricity, if you impose VAT, let us say, on hotels and manufacturing plants, the government would easily collect about $15 million a year. However, the problem is this, that they would be entitled to claim the input VAT. And so, in a sense, they would not feel the pain as much as the domestic consumers. And I'm very anxious that the domestic consumers, especially poor people, are protected during this period. because we are living through a period of turbulence, and we are not even sure where electricity prices are going to end up. So I would say that in my own view, that it is an option that some persons have put on the table. They have said, well, instead of reducing salaries of public officers to deal with the problem of excessive expenditure, why don't you consider introducing VAT on electricity and on water? I think this economy is too fragile, and as I've said before, I really do believe that we need to make a strong effort to protect the poor and the vulnerable as much as possible. I mean, I would like to think that it would only be in the very, very last resort that you would turn to such a thing. And let's be realistic. Introduce VAT on electricity and water. What are you going to do? Really, basically, you're going to dampen demand for goods and services. You're going to even reduce even further disposable income. And I don't think right now this would be the right way to go. So we have to make other sacrifices to deal with this problem. The key point, though, is this. We have done well, exceedingly well. Yesterday, I read a news clip out of Barbados, and the governor of the central bank made the point that the deficit in Barbados is about 11.2%. We had a deficit of 9.6%. We reduced it to 5.8%. What we have to do is to complete the journey. That's what we have to do. Summon the will, summon the courage. Let's do it together. Share the burden and the sacrifice across the board, and let's get it out of the way. But I think the past year has shown that we can do it, and we just need the support of everyone as we make that last hurdle.
Okay, you mentioned the sacrifice. It's going forward, as you crunch figures and you have this monumental task ahead to reduce the deficit is even further. Should every St. Lucian now be thinking, because you've mentioned how important it is that you don't get to the IMF's door. Borrowing is no longer an option. Should we be thinking sacrifice right now, every single citizen?
Well, there has been sacrifice from all citizens. When VAT was introduced, it was a new system of taxation. Initially, of course, there were a lot of hiccups, a lot of anxieties, but people have settled. People have begun to understand that VAT is not the monster that it is. Obviously, though, there are those who have disquiet about VAT on medication, but that, of course, is a separate issue. So by and large, all people have understood. We increased the price of water, and by and large, the people of St. Lucia supported it and understood we have to do something about our water supply. The government has to be grateful, has to be thankful for those things. And the persons who have borne the brunt of the contraction of this economy has been the individuals in the private sector. Some of them have lost their jobs. Some of them have seen shrinkage of their disposable income. Obviously, in the budget, we're going to see what measures would be announced to help to deal with those kinds of situations, because I did indicate that now that VAT has settled and government has a better indication of the performance of VAT, I would probably have a little more room to maneuver to do some of the things that we have wanted to do. So that there is no question that the population of St. Lucia has been part of the effort to make sacrifices. Ordinary persons in the public sector, in the private sector rather, have suffered the most because they have had to feel the pain of losing jobs. Persons in the public sector, yes, they have had to pay VAT, they've had to make adjustments to the new taxes, but their income or their privileges have not been affected during this period at all. So really what we need to do is a combined effort from everybody to come to cross this hurdle.
Thank you.
Sure.